Alright guys, welcome back to the workbench. So I've got another mod for the Evo, and as you might be able to tell, this is the newest version of the Radium double pumper housing. So I've been wanting to get one of these. When I saw that they changed it, I just had to have the new one, and I'm going to explain why, because I've looked at some of the features they changed on this. I think this thing's really quite a bit of improvement over the last one that they had. Even though I'd never ran the last one, I could just tell by looking at it it was a little bit harder to install. And then also the way they did the well, we'll talk about it in a moment. The way they did the return seems a lot better on this one. So that's the main reason why we're installing this. So as you probably know from the last video I did with the fuel system, I had to take my stock housing and drill out the orifice that it uses to siphon fuel from the other side of the tank, because it was just too much of a restriction on the return, and it caused it to have a high fuel pressure. I couldn't adjust the fuel pressure too low. So this should fix that problem, and we're gonna find out if it does. So anyways, when you get this thing, it's really nice. Obviously it's all anodized aluminum. It comes with all the fittings you need. So I bought the one without a pump because I already have a Walbro 450 LPH in my tank. We're going to take that out and put it in here, but you get all the hardware. You get 2 sets of clamps for 2 pumps. You get these, in my case, they have these special fittings that you use with the Walbro style 450 pumps, and you also get their AN style fittings if you're running AN style lines. If you don't want to use those though, it does come with the 2 standardized so you can the 2 standardized ports that are normally on the Evo, so that you could use your normal return line, your normal feed line if you want, which is what I'm going to do. Then of course you get a bag full of terminals and heat shrink and connectors, basically what you need to hook up all the electrical components that go in the tank. So let's talk about this thing real quick. The biggest difference you're going to notice on these new ones is the collector box is totally different. So on the old version, it was a 2-piece solution that you had to put in the tank first and then bolt the 2 halves together. With this one, it's a welded aluminum box that's actually mounted to the fuel pump housing. So instead of having to put that unit down in there separately and bolt it together with your hands in fuel, you just bolt this over your pump and drop the whole unit in as one. So let's go ahead and open this up, show you some of the inside features. I'm just going to grab a 3mm, no, maybe it's 3 or 4, Allen key. We take these 2 bolts out. So I've already opened this one, so these are not too tight, but normally they're a little bit tighter. Just going to put them in this little bowl here. By the way, I made this bowl in a wheel throwing class that I do with my fiance, which is kind of cool. Of course, she's kind of like, why do you use that for hardware? Well, it's so I don't lose hardware, it doesn't roll off my workbench. Alright, so I've taken those 3 bolts out on both sides. As you can see, this is the siphon for the other half of the fuel tank, and you just pull this right off. You can see inside of here we've got this hanger that can hold 2 fuel pumps, right? Comes pre-wired for the Walbro pump, and these are for your fuel temperature and fuel level. Then lastly, you can see here, let's see if I can get this in frame. Okay, so this is for 2 pumps, right? But one of them comes blocked by default because I'm only going to be running 1 pump. The other one we're going to go ahead and we're going to use, that's where we're going to mount pump that I'm taking out of my Evo right now. So even though this is a double pumper housing, I'm just going to run 1 pump. And the good thing about that is that if I run 1 pump, it actually leaves more volume in this tank to hold more fuel and keep the pump submerged at all times. You'll also notice this little flapper here. This allows fuel to come into the can, but it kind of falls down so it doesn't go out. So this will keep the pump completely submerged. I've also got this mounting piece on the side, which I believe we're going to have to take off temporarily to install the fuel level sensor and the temperature sensor. So anyways, I'm not going to film the next part, but I'm going to go in the car. I'm going to grab my stock fuel pump housing with my Walbro 450 in it, and we're going to take that apart so I can put the pump in here and show you how this thing works. Let's go ahead and turn it sideways. I've already drained the fuel and kind of let it dry for a while. First thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and pull this connector out for the level sender and for the fuel temp sender. So we're going to reuse this stuff, and it all basically more or less, I believe, unclips. So of course how it unclips, that's another story, but let's go ahead and grab a flathead, a small flathead. So I believe this just pops out, but I believe we push against here and push up, and that pops it out, right? So this little clip right here, you push that out and then slide up and it should pop right out. And then we're going to carefully pull this wire out of this groove. Right, so now we've got our fuel level sender and our fuel temp sender. Right, next thing, disconnect the pump. In this case, Walbro 450 already has a connector on it, so we're going to reuse that. Alright, so probably the next step would be to go ahead and separate the two halves so that we can get that pump out of the housing real quick, which means we'll have to pull this little clip out of here. There we go. I'm going to keep all these parts just so in case I ever put this thing back together this way, I have them. Going to go ahead and take the hose clamp off the pump. We'll see if this hose even comes off. It's on there pretty good, so I won't be surprised if I have to cut it carefully off. Yeah, we're probably going to have to carefully cut that off. Keep in mind, you're going to need this gasket that seals the housing. You're going to need this to put on the new one. So we're going to take this other stuff and set it to the side. Want to be really careful not to cut into the pump itself. We just want to put a little bit of a fracture in this so we can begin to get it off. Yep, there we go. We don't want to damage this nipple because when you see the new Radium fitting, it's going to have an O-ring that goes around this, and we want this to be nice and smooth like it was before. So be careful. If you're reusing a 450 pump, don't cut that by accident. Don't cut too hard. Make sure your blade is sharp and brand new so that you can cut the plastic easily. I don't know why I'm having such a hard time getting these clips. It's not that hard. There we go. Alright, let's go dump some of this fuel outside and let it evaporate because it's still got a lot of fuel in it. Alright, so now we've got the fuel pump. Let's go ahead and remove it from the adapter so that we can put it in the Radium housing right next to me. There we go. Alright, so the pump's starting to slide out. Let's get the wiring. Make sure that we keep this clean. Although the bench is clean, so I'm not really too worried. Well, first things first, let's go ahead and talk about how the fitting goes on this, because it's a special fitting that they made just for this pump. Alright, so we're back. Something happened with the GoPro, it decided to turn off. But anyways, let's assemble this thing. So you first take this piece. We're going to put it in here. You see there's two ridges on this. We're going to take these two lock rings and we're going to put it in between them. It's a little tricky to get them in at first, so let's go ahead and try and do that. There are two halves to this locking ring. It's a little tricky, but you can see I've got them on there. You can see pretty well the two rings, and they're on in between the two barbs. I don't know if the GoPro can really focus on that. Once we've done that, we take this O-ring that they give you, stick it in there. Then lastly, we take the other half, we put it on, we take the screws that they give you, you put them in, which this is probably easier to do when you're not trying to do it on camera. So 3 screws. We're not gonna tighten them all the way down yet. Just gonna get them started. All right. So now we've got it on there. You can see this part actually spins so that we can tighten it into the housing. Let's go ahead and finish tightening these. Make sure you give this a good snug because you want to be sure that it's sealed before you put this sucker together, because you will not be getting to these bolts without taking the whole thing apart pretty much. Before I forget, before I get ahead of myself trying to put the pump in here and blocking the view, let's talk about how the return line on this tank, on this in-tank unit works compared to the stock one. So on the stock one, the siphon acts as a restriction and uses Venturi effect to siphon fuel from one side of the tank to the other, and it's on the return line side. This creates a lot of back pressure, and it makes it so that if you have a high flow pump, that your fuel pressure is going to go higher than you really want it, and it's hard to adjust it. So the solution, as I did in the last video about my fuel pump, was to drill it out bigger, but it's still restrictive. Now in the Radium one, you can see all these holes here, these 6 holes. Those are the return holes. So those actually connect from the return hose side right here and just fall into the collector tank. Now the siphon is totally different. So here's the siphon, and you can see you've got this little duct valve. This is where the fuel pumps out. So you have this tube that connects to the other side of the tank, siphons it up and dumps it into the collector tank. And this is actually connected to the feed side, so it still uses the Venturi effect, but instead of being a restriction on the return, it uses the flow of the pump to help pull fuel from the other side of the tank and dump it onto the side where the fuel pump is. So this is actually a lot better design than the stock one, because this is not going to have any restriction on the return line. I should be able to get my fuel pressure down to the 43 psi that's expected at idle with the vacuum line disconnected. All right, so back to what I was going to do before. Let's go ahead and get that pump out of the housing. I'm going to show you what parts we're reusing. We're basically going to take this sucker and we're going to thread it in to here and to this. Now I think we're going to actually pull this cage off because it'll make it easier to thread this, and then when we get to the get it all the way down, we go ahead and bolt the cage back on and use the included clamps to tie the pump to the cage. Alright, well the GoPro seems to be unhappy because it keeps turning off, but I took the time while it was off to go ahead and tighten this, and as you can see, you just turn it until it's in there. Now there is a orientation you kind of want to clock this to. Basically want it to kind of line up. Let me pull this back so you can see the pump's supposed to kind of line up with the cutout in the bracket. So we're going to go ahead and attach this bracket with the screws and then use the 2 hose clamps around this part to hold the pump on. Alright, so we take 2 of these hose clamps. I'm going to need to undo them all the way. Honestly, I'm not sure you need to put 2 on each one, but we'll do it anyways. I don't think this thing's really going to move, but we'll do it. Put a little bit of a bend right here, kind of like that, so that we can get this to kind of go in easier. Let's do the OCD thing and get these positioned at about the same spot before we tighten them. Alright. So you can see now we've got the pump installed, we got the fitting on, the 2 clamps, we already got our sock on. Just going to make this connection, which they already installed one of the connectors. If you have dual pump, you put the second pump wiring here, which they do give you. And this is specifically for the Walbro style 450 pumps. When you order it, make sure you get the right one. So anyways, plug and play pretty much from there. Alright, so we got that done. Now we're going to go ahead and put the collector box back on this thing, because everything else is going to be done. Let's go ahead and put this sucker on. Make sure these are tight. Alright, so now we just got to put the fuel pressure or fuel level sender and fuel temp sensor on there, and we'll be ready to go. So there is a little bit of wiring that's required. So you can see they have two connectors, whereas these, you know, has one, and actually they share this ground right here. So this is ground, I'm pretty sure, because these both share the same ground up here, which is the green and the brown wire. Anyways, I'm pretty sure what we're going to end up doing is cutting these off. That's what the instructions are going to tell us. And then in this bag, we've got a whole plethora of other components that we're going to need, and I think we need this bag. Let's go ahead and go read the instructions, and then I'm going to come back and finish the wiring on this. Alright, so what I've done to make this easier is I've taken two pieces of blue tape and I marked the two wires that are shared ground. We're going to go ahead and cut those out of this connector, and then I'm going to cut the other two, which will be the signal wire for both of these. Start with the temp sensor, and it might not even matter on this one. I have a feeling it might not. Let's go ahead and strip a little bit of the insulation from here. Right, so they included these two connectors. They also included these pins. Grab my helping hand just because we're going to do some soldering. Now if you have the right crimper, you can crimp these on, but to be honest, I prefer to solder anyways because I feel like it's a stronger hold. Turn on our handy dandy portable Milwaukee soldering iron, because this will be the quickest way. Once this green light stops flashing, should be ready to go. There we go. That thing is quick. Clean the tip a little bit. This is handy because I can take this in the car too and do a lot of soldering, which I don't normally do on the bench. Get this wire tinned, get the other wire tinned. Alright, so we've got these soldered in pretty good. We're still going to go ahead and crimp them somewhat. But since we don't have the right size crimper, we're just going to basically fold it over with some pliers. Now the wire itself is not going to come out. We still want to kind of crimp the insulation down as best as we can. That's not bad. That'll work. Repeat the same thing on the other side. Alright, so these two are ready to go. We're going to insert them into one of these connector housings. But let's take a look at the housing so we know which one we're doing. So on the top you have level, ground, and temp. So this is the temp sensor, and this was the ground. So we want to make sure that one of these pins into here, this ground one, and then the other side goes into here. Now if we look on the bottom and we look at the lugs and the way they're connected, this one with the green and the white wire is the one for the temp sensor, and the green wire goes to ground and the white wire goes to the temp signal. So in order to do this, we take this connector, take a look at it, and like I said, the green goes to ground, so we want to put this one in there. Let's go ahead and stick it in. Just double check before we snap it in completely. Yep, so this one's the ground. Go ahead and push that in there. It's in there good. Then this one is obviously the other side. So just stick that in. Carefully push it down. I can go ahead and take this tape off now since I know which side is which. We're going to pretty much repeat the same process for the level sender. And then we're going to attach them to this plate in a moment. So let me do that off camera and come back and show you how to attach them. Alright, so we've got our two sensors ready to go. We need to pop them on here, and the quickest way to do this is to go ahead and take the two screws out and take the plate off, because we're going to need to zip tie the temp sensor. Alright, so we're going to take the temp sensor. You can see it's going to basically fit in this little groove here. And we're going to zip tie that sucker on. Alright, so we got one zip tie, and we're going to do the other one so it doesn't come off. Alright, so you can see it's on there pretty good. Shouldn't be going anywhere. Let's go ahead and pull this off. So, we could put this on now, but I have a feeling that if we did, it's easy, you just snap it on. It might be in the way of the screws a little bit, so let's screw this back on first, then we'll snap that on. Okay, take the float to the fuel level, stick it on there, pull it down, it should snap on, and then you're ready to go. We just need to plug these in. So again, brown and blue wire, that's going to go to your level sender. The other one's going to go to your temp. Now, these are kind of long. What I would suggest doing is pushing as much of this wire back into here as you can to kind of get it out of the way, because you're going to need that when you're dropping it in the tank. Heck, you might even want to zip tie some of this out of the way if you can, which I think we will. We'll put a zip tie around here to hold the wiring out of the way. It's always handy to have zip ties. If you ain't got zip ties, you probably shouldn't be working on your car very often. I'm gonna zip tie it as well. Keep all this excess out of the way. This will keep it nice and tidy when we're putting it in too. So there you go. We've got this housing ready to go in, and we're going to go ahead and just drop it in like we would a normal pump. Make sure you got the old O-ring, and then I'm going to go and do that, explain how the new connections on the top are going to work, because they're a little bit different. There will be some more soldering and crimping that's going to go on. Alright gents, so this isn't too bad. A lot of the factory stuff's just going to hook right up. First, let's go ahead and get the return line on. They put a little cap on here to keep the return line clean. Just going to stick this hose on. Put this clamp back on. Factory feed line goes on like normal. Right? The cool thing is when you bolt this down, if you look at the top, it has a picture of the Evo on it to tell you which direction it faces. So this should face forward like the front of the car and backwards. Now with this, you have to take these two little bolts out of here, pull the bracket, put this down, and then we move on to wiring. So let's go ahead and get an Allen wrench for that. Careful not to drop those bolts in there, because until you do, you got that hole there that you can accidentally drop it in. So we go ahead and take the sensor with its O-ring on it, push it down into the hole. and take this thing, careful not to lose the bolts, and put it back over. All right, so now we're gonna have to actually pull the wires out of this connector. We're gonna use 3 of them to go here. 2 of them went to the fuel pump originally. We're not using those 2 because we got the fuel pump rewired already. Fuel pump 1 is gonna come over here. So we're gonna go take the lugs that came with the kit and solder them onto the appropriate wires following the directions. All right, guys, so took a little bit of a break and came back. Of course, on camera, it's not gonna look like anything. Let's go ahead and break this connector open. We're gonna connect to some of the wires inside of it. There we go. All right, so there's quite a few wires in here. The blue and the black wire would be to the pump, except for we've got a rewired pump kit, right? Which I've shown in another video. The other 3 wires are for here, for the sender and for the fuel temp sensor. We're gonna snip all these carefully to leave as much slack as we can. And we're gonna rewire them based on the Radium instructions. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and try to peel some of this back. Carefully cut this off without cutting some wires. That way we have some wiring exposed. But we're basically gonna take these 3 smaller gauge wires and we're gonna put some connectors on them, some terminal lugs really. All right, go ahead and take our soldering iron, some solder. All right, come on, green, green, green. There we go. Try not to breathe too much of this in, hold my breath. The kit came with some small heat shrink, which we're gonna put on all 3 of these. Pull it back as far as we can. And then also, we have 3 small terminal lugs, which we're gonna slip onto here. We're gonna solder those on one at a time. So once they've cooled off sufficiently, like this last one, we can go ahead and slip the heat shrink up as far as we can on them. Got this handy dandy DeWalt heat gun. Should be good. Now, it comes with extra heat shrink for these 2 bigger ones, and I'm just gonna put a little bit on the end to keep them from shorting on anything, because we're not gonna use them since we had the pump rewire. All right, those are good. Now I'm gonna get some more heat shrink and cover both those wires at the same time. Just so happens that I keep a lot of heat shrink on hand for doing RC car and helicopter stuff. This should work, I think. We'll see. Just a little bit of extra protection. This will just make me feel better about leaving these 2 wires down here disconnected. This way I know they won't short on anything. Need to consult my phone real quick because I took a picture of the page on Radium. So apparently, depending on the model year, different things mean different wires. So on mine, 2008 to 2010, black is ground, yellow and red, which I believe is this one, is the fuel level sender, and then white and black is the temp. So just looking at this, temp is white and black, ground is black, level is this other one. let's go ahead and put those on there where they're supposed to go. All right, let's go get the nuts that come with the kit. I'm gonna use a little bit of Loctite blue thread locker because I've heard that these nuts got him! Can loosen up sometimes. We're gonna put just a tiny dab on the top. Oh, that was a lot. All right, that should keep them in place. Now we need to do the last 2 wires, which are going to be our fuel pump. And again, they gave us 2 pieces of giant heat shrink for these. Let's go ahead and turn the iron back on. Get ready to tin these suckers. Make sure your fuel tank is sealed up before you start soldering shit, because you don't want to set yourself on fire here. Alright, so now we can solder these ones on, be done with them. Alright, that should be good if we can get the ground now. Those look pretty good. Let's let them cool down just a little bit. Take this little nugget off of there. See if we can get this heat shrink around it. There we go. Alright, and simple enough. We're going to go ahead and route these. So positive, obvious. It's pretty obvious which one goes where. Again, we'll just put a dab of blue. Take the nuts, get them screwed down. Now all we should have to do is go ahead and prime the car and see if it starts. Something to keep in mind is that because I am going to probably change the fuel pressure one more time, I will probably have to rescale the injectors again. Alright, gents. I don't know if you can see that, but we've got it running at around 45 psi with the vacuum line disconnected. So we're going to go ahead and tighten down the set screw so that it doesn't move. We're going to hook up the vacuum line, and then we're going to have to rescale the injectors. I'm going to put this wrench here. Just going to double check it real quick. Still at 45. Right. Pop this vac line back on. There you go. It drops a little bit more. It drops to about 38, which is fine. It's good. We'll put a zip tie on this sucker and call it done until we do the scaling. Alright guys, thanks for tuning in. That's it for this episode. I'm just going to rescale the injectors on my own. Bye.